Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today as we discuss neurodiversity, mental health, and attending events and conferences. I'm absolutely delighted that so many have registered for today's event, as I believe that truly indicates the importance our community place on building truly inclusive event experiences. So I'll shortly introduce you to our wonderful speakers today. We'll be joined by Matt, Helen, and Tiffany, and they're going to share their view on why this conversation is important to them. They'll highlight the connection between good mental health and neurodiversity, and they'll share some practical tips and actions that we can all deploy to make our events truly inclusive. But before that, I just wanted to share, really from ITM's perspective, why we felt we needed to delve a little bit deeper into understanding how our events made all of our community and members feel. We really wanted to ensure, as we were leading up to our biggest event of the year, our spring conference in April, that we were truly considering the well-being and the mental health of all our delegates and members that would be with us or considering joining us really for that event. After each event at ITM, we do always send out a post-event survey, and I know many of you in the call today will have completed those for us, but we do take the results really seriously. And we've noticed from some of the feedback that for some of our members, that attending large in-person events, and particularly around some of the sensory overload and amongst some of the networking events, that there was a degree of anxiety that could be felt by some, and a degree of feeling slightly uncomfortable in those environments. So what we wanted to do then, as we went into our planning for our big event, as I say, in April this year, is we wanted to really understand how our members felt and what actions and steps we could really take. So I turned to our good friend Matt to help us with that, and we constructed a survey that we sent out in January this year to some of our members. So I'm just going to share a couple of slides really in terms of what that survey showed and then what we did with the results of that survey to try and really delve deeper into our event planning and look at how we could make sure that we were meeting the needs of all of our delegates, and looking at how we could make sure that that event truly felt inclusive, comforting, welcoming, and safe for everybody that was attending it. So I'm just going to share my screen and I will just run through some of the results that came out of that survey. So I'll just pop the slides up now. And, sorry, there we go. So hopefully everybody can see that okay. So what was quite concerning was when we did look at the results that came back, it was clearly evident that there were some really high percentage numbers here across our membership where people were feeling a degree of strain and stress and challenge really on their mental health. We can see here that burnout was a very high figure, which is unsurprising, really, given what our industry and community have been through over the past couple of years. But it was also looking at that generalized sort of anxiety disorder and also some of our members suffering from depression. When we looked at what sort of impacted our members' sort of event experience, and even for some prevented them from wanting to go to an event or raised concern or worry or anxiety with actually registering for an event. These were some of the words that came through in the responses to that. So really looking at that overstimulation, about the busyness of an event, about the number of people that potentially were there and the strain on sort of being part of that large group and that large amount of information that was constantly coming towards you. And also for those that were maybe not so comfortable and actually being able to go forward and speak to others in an environment maybe where you didn't know very many people, or there were people that seemed to already know each other. So from that, we really looked at what were the actions we could take. And Matt very kindly introduced us to the fabulous Helen and the team at Eventwell. And we knew straight away that they were the right people to be able to help us make a significant positive impact to some of our members at the conference in April. We built in the quiet area, and we'll talk about that in more detail as we go through the conversation today. But that was really significant and made a big difference for those people that wanted to step away and get away and just get some of that quiet time away from the main busy event. We also extended our buddy program and looked at that for new members and also those people that wanted a little bit more support, having meeting points and a connection there that you had somebody you could go to and meet with and talk to during the event. We looked at bowl food instead of having sit down food during the day, so that people could choose who or where they wanted to eat in front of. We looked at a full program of well-being. So previously we may just have had a run or a jog, but that didn't suit everybody, and perhaps even raised concern for some if they didn't feel their fitness level was at that level to join. So we expanded that well-being program in the morning, bringing in daylight, bringing in beach cleans, looking at a well-being session, bringing in a mindfulness session. So we looked at how we could expand that to meet everybody's needs. And it was really all of those actions, including, free seating. And really, ultimately, it was a multitude of actions that we could put in place, some that were very simple and very easy to implement, but did make a significant difference. So with that said, I am going to stop talking, and I am absolutely delighted to bring on our fabulous speakers today. So Matt will host the discussion between Helen and Tiffany. And thank you so much for your time, and thank you to those that have joined us today. So I'll hand over to Matt. If everybody during the conversation could add any questions they have for our speakers to the Q&A, that would be amazing. Matt will pick up through the conversation, and I'll be back at the very end as well to check in. So thank you so much, dear speakers. Thank you to our delegates for joining, and I will hand over to you, Matt. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Kerry. A pleasure as always. And thank you to everybody that has joined and who will listen. This is being recorded. So just so you're aware, if you're asking questions, this is a recorded session. We're going to talk openly about neurodiversity, mental health, conferences, events and meetings. We're going to try and do as much as we can over the next 40 minutes or so. So please feel free, as Kerry says, pop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Q&A is probably the best place to put them. We'll try and host some of those as we go along, but if we don't, we'll definitely reach to them in the end. But very quickly, before we get going, introductions, of course. You need to know a little bit about these wonderful people that are on the screen, and I'll share a little bit about my journey as well in here. But Tiffany, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself first, very quickly. Just your insight and awareness around neurodiversity as well would be useful.
Thank you, Matt, and good morning, everybody. Real pleasure to be with you today. So I'm Tiffany Casson. I am a client relationship manager for Intel, and my connection with neurodiversity is, I guess, threefold, really, for me. Number one, I live with neurodiversity at home, so I have lived experience of neurodiversity in my home life. Number two, the area that I kind of cover for Intel is travel and meetings and events. So I have a clear passion for meetings and events and what happens in that space. And thirdly, I work alongside an organisation called Neurodiversity in Business, which is a charity forum, a business forum set up to help recruitment and retention of neurodivergent employees in the workplace. So good morning, everybody.
Thank you, Tiffany. Lovely to have you as well. Helen, good morning. Tell us a little bit about you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Helen Moon. I am the Chief Exec of Eventwell. We are a not-for-profit social enterprise operating in the events industry, and we specialise in providing neuro-inclusive and mental wellbeing friendly event spaces. So that's from a business perspective, my kind of link to neurodiversity. But personally, I'm actually neurodivergent. So I was late diagnosed at the age of 49 last year, although it was about a 12-month process to kind of get that diagnosis, because I was actually diagnosed with bipolar in 2009. So I am what you would call an ADHDer. It's taken me about 6 months to learn how to say that. So I had ADHD and autism. And then a diagnosis of bipolar in 2009, although that is probably questionable a little bit now of my neurodivergence diagnosis. But I have a long history, because I'm neurodivergent, I have a long history of living personally with mental health from a very young age. So with struggles with my mental health and elements of that. So lots of lovely lived experience to talk about, and also as well that the very important vital work that Eventwell is doing in the events industry.
Excellent. And we're going to delve deeper into the Eventwell business and the type of work that you're doing as well, Helen. And for anybody that did attend the ITM conference, I hope you managed to spend a little bit of time around the Eventwell area. We'll talk a bit about that as well in the construct. But thank you, Helen, for sharing openly about your own personal journey, and Tiffany, of course, for your experience, within your world, your three elements that you talk to. And what I've loved, and just for everybody listening, really, is getting to know Tiffany. I've only really got to know Tiffany this year, and as we started to talk, it just becomes really apparent that we're like Pringles. When we pop, we can't stop, which actually is a little bit to do with neurodiversity in many ways, because when you're really passionate, so one of the skills and superpowers of neurodiversity is this ability to sort of have hyperactivity around a specific subject you're really passionate about. So it's wonderful when I chat with Tiffany and with Helen as well. We're just like little, which leads into why I do this, I guess, because I'm really passionate about mental health. As everybody knows, I talk about it all the time. But what's happening over the last few years in particular is this convergence of neurodiversity into my world, because I didn't sort of notice it for quite a long time. Like most people, actually. Why would we notice it if it's not something that's front and center and we're listening and watching things about it? And so for me, in 2020, my eldest daughter was diagnosed with autism, and she was 17 at the time, but we've had a long journey with her with mental illness and mental health problems, and that will talk a little bit to this session as well. And so having an autistic daughter, a daughter with the gift of autism. I also have a daughter who was diagnosed. So I only have two daughters. Every time I say daughters, it sounds like I've got many. I have two daughters, and my youngest daughter was diagnosed with ADHD earlier this year. And what I found quite fascinating through that process and that diagnosis, and she's 15 years old, is we've raised two children almost through their whole teens without even knowing or recognizing or understanding that they were maybe struggling at times with neurodiversity. Now, neurodiversity is becoming a much more mainstream topic, and we will hear more about this as we go. We keep on seeing it, documentaries and episodes of things going on. And just this week, there was a documentary or a panorama from the BBC that exposed, or in the last week, exposed some things around ADHD, and there's some risks in there, of course, as well. It's not about people just trying to jump on bandwagons. I think that's what we have to be very clear and careful with. This is a serious challenge for a lot of people. But what we're doing now is unveiling the reality of this and trying to provide support and help. So there's a hereditary part to ADHD. There's about statistics around 71 to 90% of people with ADHD, it's hereditary. So it comes through a parent lineage. So maybe that is why I have moments of hyperactivity. I don't have a diagnosis. So I'm not going to sit here and say I have a diagnosis, but I definitely have traits. And I think we all have traits, right? So this conversation today is to help us to sort of frame this world of conferencing, neurodiversity, mental health. We're going to try and bring it all together so we can give you some ideas and insights as people who may plan meetings or attend meetings and conferences, things that we can do to improve. It's estimated that between 15 and 20% of the population have neurodiversity. Now, that's an estimation, albeit there is considerations that it's more than 1 in 5 people who have neurodiverse traits. And so we need to start to build in thoughts around how to support people better. One of the things that I found quite interesting in the construct of the ITM conference in Brighton was around this conversation of, if we help the minority, so let's say neurodiversity is the minority right now, the neurotypical people, so we'll be very clear in differentiation between the two words. Neurodiversity covers off a spectrum of different neurodiverse needs versus neurotypical, which is what most people represent as, or the 80%. If we look after the 20%, actually we're looking after 100%. Because most of the tools and thoughts and symptoms or systems that we can put in place help everybody, not just those people who are struggling. So quiet spaces, even us, neurotypical people like a bit of peace and quiet at times. I'm sure you agree. So we're going to launch into some of the conversation now, and we're going to open it up. And why do you believe then? So Tiffany and Helen, question to you. I'll put my thoughts in afterwards. So why do you believe this is an important conversation to bring to the front and fore right now in this session? Give me an idea.
Should I?
Go for it, Helen.
Okay. It's important because we're all neurodiverse. So Eventwell's kind of definition of neurodiversity is kind of, we follow, it's like there's many other organisations that follow this. So neurodiversity is when we refer to the idea that there are different brain types. So neurotypical and neurodivergent people fall under neurodiversity. So it's what when we refer to people that might be diagnosed with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, OCD, all of those kind of elements, that is what we would call neurodivergence. So a neurodivergent brain. And a neurodivergent brain is a brain that would diverge away from what is termed or the idea to be a normal or typical brain. And then you have the neurotypical brain, which is all you boring normal people. Yeah.
Well, we have to be
I
careful.
love. I know. I'm joking. I love Matt's description. I'm going to call myself Pringle from now on. I am. It's just such a brilliant. Once you pop me, you can't stop. Although, to be honest with you, if you pop me on a topic that I'm not that interested in, you find it very hard to get me started. To be honest with you. So it's important because there are a lot of things, and I'm going to talk about my personal journey a little bit here. I think I've been in mental health services for 30 years. I'm struggling, basically, but you would never know because it's all been internalized and held inside. And only those people that have been very close to me would have any idea that anything is going on in my life at all, or that I've had struggles. And we're talking about very real struggles. I mean, there's suicidality in there as well. And attempts like that. And from a very young age, I remember from a very just generally feeling different to other people and knowing that I didn't quite fit in. And you can imagine what the trauma of that is like for a person who goes through their lives every day realizing that something's not quite right in relation to their peers, their schoolmates, then their workmates, their business acquaintances, or something. Customers and people like that are working with, and this is on a day-to-day basis. And all it basically comes down to is the fact that you have people who have neurodivergence who are trying to fit into a neurotypical world that isn't quite set up with the way that our brains function and how we want to do things and how those natural brain processes work for us. Okay, so that's the struggle. It's that constantly being called weird and thinking yourself that you're weird in a way. The amount of times I've turned around to my husband and kind of said, why can't I just be normal? And it's and that's a very real thing for a lot of people. Yeah. And Matt, you mentioned the Panorama programme that's been on recently. It highlighted some very, very serious issues in terms of what's going on right now in terms of diagnosis. I myself am a late diagnosis who had to seek private sources. I had to go privately. I remember what I said. I was in mental health services. I've been in mental health services for 30 years. So it was an easier process for me because I've not had to go for a full clinical diagnosis because I'm in mental health services. But I had to seek that because other people were talking about their neurodivergence and me going, hang on a minute. And my little girl has elements of sensory needs that she has, so she probably won't we won't put her for a full clinical diagnosis because she doesn't need support. And I'm also of the belief that we don't unnecessarily need to stick labels on people. It's so that we have an understanding of how we can regulate and take better care of ourselves and how we fit in that neurotypical world, if that makes sense. But the danger of the programme that came out on Panorama is it was very one-sided, and it kind of spoke more about people dangerously seeking private diagnosis without actually addressing the issue of why people are going privately anyway. And that's because we have an NHS system that's massively under-resourced, is unaware, is uneducated, and people like me have been missed for 30 years and have struggled all their lives and have just had antidepressants and all kinds of other medication kind of thrown at them without a real kind of understanding of what's going on. So that's why conversations like this are important, because there's an awful lot of people out there who are struggling in silence, internalizing, feeling like they don't fit in. And it's now time for us to change the narrative, push the boundaries out, and start being as open as we can as organisations, as institutions, as systems, to look at that neurotypical system and kind of say, how can we make this inclusive for everybody? Because it brings it back to we are all neurodiverse. So we're not just talking about neurodivergent people here, we're talking about introverts as well. We're not all extroverted, are we? Kind of stuff. How many blog posts do you see? How to be more introverted? Here's your top 5 tips. You'd never see anything like that, do you? So we're all different. We all operate and do things in different ways. So when we look at inclusivity in our environments or our institutions, we're not just talking about the hidden disabilities and this, we're talking about making it more friendly for all of us to be able to contribute, to work productively, to work fruitfully, and to have purpose. And that falls under the WHO's definition of what mental well-being is. Okay, so that's in a nutshell for me.
All right. Well, I think you've shared so much. So thank you so much there, Helen, and for sharing some of the the realities and experiences that you've been through. We can't fix all the systems, but what we're trying to do, of course, is unveil this reality, isn't it? So we appreciate your comments there, Helen, and thank you for sharing that. Tiffany, just coming to you about the why, just very quickly.
Yeah, just the why, Matt, and all of the above of what Helen has shared. Like, I actually feel it when you're talking, Helen. I feel it. All those things that you've just shared, I feel that. I feel your position and how challenging that has been. And the why for me is that Helen shared it, lived experience. This is what she's gone through. We go from the school system, where I'd like to believe that in a higher percentage of cases we have an element of support in the school system. That's another subject area and a whole session we could do on the education system. But then the chances are that we move on, we develop, we go into maybe college, uni, then the workplace. And once we get to that workplace, where do we go from there? What support network is there in place? And I think there'll be partners on this call today, on this webinar, who are way down the road on this. They will understand this, that have got it in their ED&I policies, that have got good, strong programs in place. I'm not here today to kind of say it doesn't exist. It is out there in some form and in some element. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we could share that fantastic practice across all of our areas within the travel industry and get everybody to that same level? So that's the why for me, hearing it firsthand from Helen and kind of banging my little drum about wanting to make a big difference with this. Really, that's the why for me.
Yeah, and you got big drumsticks, so you're banging it quite loud, Tiffany. So it's really
I am.
Keep banging it. We'll all keep banging drums. So it's really important, and I think that's ultimately what we're all trying to say. Is this is a topic that actually we need to really take notice to now, because so many people, and looking at, we're not going into the systems and the education and the NHS and everything in terms of fixing the problems, but you don't fix neurodiversity, by the way. You just support it. That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You only support it when you know what you need to support, and that's the ultimate thought of this conversation. There is one other frame I just want to bring into play, and I know, Helen, you've touched on it already a little bit with your experiences, is the connection and convergence of mental health and neurodiversity. Now, it's one subject where, if you think about traditional sort of storylines over the last few years, you tend to have a mental health story or a neurodiversity story, but the problem is they're actually interlocked and they're connected in many ways, and there is a much higher risk of developing mental illnesses if you are neurodivergent. So there's a fact for everybody out there in the big wide sort of virtual space. I don't know if you're aware. So be very mindful of, if we are helping people who are struggling or maybe living with neurodiversity, I shouldn't say struggling, it's sorry, because not everybody's struggling, but living with neurodiversity, we're actually helping to minimize risks or reduce risks around developing mental illnesses. And of course, it's not always that easy, because there's this wonderful thing called masking. We'll talk a bit about that as well, where people put on that face, that mask, pretend everything's fine. Helen, you've already talked about it. I think you've covered off pretty much everything we're going to cover anyway in your introduction there. But this is something we need to take into consideration here, isn't it? So I was reading a report this morning from WHASU, which is the World Happiness Summit, and they've given their summarised report. It's a really fascinating report to go and read. And there was one of the areas talked about the 3 areas for well-being at work. Now, well-being obviously is a big topic. We cover many aspects. There are 3 points. I just wanted to share that because I thought it was useful for this. Physical and psychological safety is one. Fair and equitable compensation is the other. And the third one is about being authentic. Being authentic. So having the ability to come to work and be you rather than pretending who you are. Now, that is quite a liberating thought, isn't it? If you could be authentic in your workplace and you could share with them your struggles, your challenges, or even your uniqueness and your quirkiness, maybe then we can improve the well-being of many. So that's a thought for everybody, just throwing it out there. I've not shared that with any of Tiffany or Helen on here, but I'm sure you've got a thought. Helen, come to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that very quickly in terms of my diagnosis last year. Kind of said, for me, it's not about me sticking a label on me. It's about exactly what Matt just said. It's liberated me. Because I've accepted myself. I can be myself, all my quirks and weirdness. I love my weirdness now. I'm not frightened of it. Whereas before that, I was scared. I wanted to be normal. Now I don't want to be normal because I'm a bit like, I love who I am now and I can be me. So I just wanted to throw that
out. And I wouldn't say weirdness, I'd say uniqueness. I think it's, we put weird into a really negative frame, but unique is something that we want to be unique in many ways. So I love it, Helen. Tiffany, you've got any thoughts about
Yeah, and I think you're quite right with that. And I think you get the best out of people, actually, Matt and Helen, if they can be their authentic selves, because masking, as you know, Helen, as I see day in, day out, is utterly exhausting, and to the point where your brain can literally need to just shut down because it's just got too much sensory stuff going on in there and it just needs to close down. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get this into our meeting space, that actually we can be our true authentic self? We put some measures in place that whether we call them adjustments, whether we just call them some thoughts to think about, so that we're aware of what some of these traits are that are going on in people, and people are able to then be their authentic self because they've got spaces to go to. They feel inclusive, and that's the key, isn't it? But yeah, absolutely, masking. We need to be our authentic self. It's so important.
And so really useful. And one of the words you used in there was sensory, the stimulation of senses. So let's talk about conferences and events. Let's bring the frame to the conversation of that now. I think we've covered off sort of a little bit about what it is, how it works, the engagement, or the connection with mental health. So if we're thinking about conferences and events then, and we're thinking about senses, so this is one of the areas where, for anybody that isn't aware of sort of the difference between neurotypical and neurodiverse, is people with neurodiversity tend to have very heightened senses. Or sensory challenges often. So let's talk about that. So what do we know about sensory overload? Anybody know anything about sensory overload? I'm sure, Tiffany, you see it in your world, and Helen, you live it in your space, right?
Yeah.
Just briefly, your thoughts on that.
I almost, sometimes I call it my superpower in a way. It's like if I go into, if I can feel, you feel it happening. So you feel it building up. It's almost like your senses become more attuned and heightened.
Yeah.
So your sight becomes more. Your pupils are dilated. You can see things. You're hearing things that perhaps other people won't be able to. You can smell things that my husband has a thing where he'll get me to smell them because he kind of taps into it. Kind of, you super smell. Go on, tell me if that's all right. Type stuff. It's all little elements like that, but you can feel it. Your brain is working harder because your senses are more attuned and heightened. It's almost like your system goes into a stress response. Basically, what's happening. So your heart will, because you've gone into stress response, your heart's starting to beat faster. Your blood pressure's going. So your whole system, not just your sensory system, but your whole system is on high alert. And when you're operating at that kind of level, that kind of alert level of the body, so anybody that knows anything about this, that Matt will know all about this, the 3 stages of stress. When you're in alarm, heightened alert stage, you're working, you get tired, you get exhausted. You can't operate like that for a long period of time. So if your senses and your systems like that for an 8-hour period, that's when it gets too much, and that's where the sensory overload comes in. And then really from the autism perspective, it's the noise, the smells, the people, touch. You become more attuned to things in your clothing, kind of some labels on the inside, things that scratch you, all of those kind of things. And it just gets too much to the fact that it's almost like everything starts to get distorted, and you start to see, I know people that start to see colours, stuff in the eyesight, or start to hear things where it gets the sound gets really distorted, and then the brain just goes enough, shut down. And that's when you get you'll probably be aware of the kind of naughty boy autism side, or the naughty child autism that's shouting and screaming and stuff, and that's basically because the brain's gone so they're trying to regulate. Basically, you're trying to get the overload out, but really what you need to do is take that person away from that environment. Or some people go and hide. Mine was hide. So at conferences and events, I used to go and hide in the toilet. So I go and hide in the toilet for 10-15 minutes and then come out, recompose myself, powder my nose, retouch lipstick, wipe the eyes, the tears away from the eyes type stuff, and then go back out. And then an hour later, I'll be back in there because the environment hasn't changed. So it just builds up again. And it's like you're on a constant loop. Is the best way to describe it. And it's exhausting.
And can you imagine, you talked about those stats in the beginning, Matt. Can you imagine if you've got a room of 100 people, that 15 to 20 people potentially could be feeling those things, Helen, that you've just described? So in a traditional, full on launch conference, the music's booming, the smoke machines go in, the lights are going, there's crowds of people, you're trying to find somebody that you might want to strike a conversation with that you don't know. And can you imagine that high percentage of people in that room have those sorts of thought processes, Helen, that you're talking about there? That's why this is important, isn't it? That's why this topic today is very, very relevant to what we're doing in terms of our industry.
And again, it's all internalised, so that we're not going to tell you. If you're the organiser, we're not going to tell you. We'll go and hide. You'll probably only be aware if there is an incident where someone breaks down and they do start the shouting and something happens in that regard. That's the only time that you would know. The majority of the time, people hide. It's that flight element of the stress response, which is why I brought up the stress response, because that's what happens in your system. Your brain kind of goes, I can't cope with this. Stress response. People tend to run away, or they just leave. And that person that leaves will never go to one of your events again, because then they've got the trauma experience of that event for the next time. So if you invite them back, they might register to attend, but the likelihood of them actually turning up is very low. So again, this is exactly what Tiff said. This is why this is so important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we validated the importance, and I think we're absolutely hyper focused on the fact that that we need to make sure we're clear on it. And what I find quite interesting, and for anybody listening as well, and please do remember you can ask questions as well if you want to. We'll answer if we go, if we can. Is this thought that says before you've even listened to any of the sessions or attended any of the conference, you can already be in a really sort of quite difficult state, right, internally with this stress, this pressure, and so breaking those thoughts down. If we're on the outside thinking about how can we support people better in a conference environment, or it could be just a big meeting or an event, when should we start supporting people? That's going to be the question, isn't it? Is it when they walk through the door at the hotel for the event? Is it before? And I have my thoughts on what I think it should be, but I'll throw that back to both of you from your perspective, because I know, Tiffany, obviously your business is very much involved in meeting event construction.
Absolutely.
So I'll start with you, if that's okay, Tiffany, on this one.
Yeah, Matt, it's a great question. And I think it all starts pre-event. So, it starts pre-event, really understanding what it is that we're wanting to get out of that event. What does that look like? And how can we build that event in a way that is inclusive across the board? So we already talk about, don't we? We talk about things like, in terms of from a physical need, do we need to have wheelchair access? How will that work, etc. But this is different. This is different because this is a different subject area, but still equally as important in terms of how we build that. So, for me, I'm thinking about, if I'm a delegate, so from a delegate perspective, I'm thinking about, how do I even get there? What does that look like? What's the signage going to be like? Once I get into that space, who do I go to? How does that work? So it's about how we build the pre-event planning. And I think that is absolutely key. So it's all about the arrival, building the content, but secondly, from a delegate perspective, what does that look like? What am I going to expect? Can I run through what that will look like for me? What is the agenda? How does that work? What part do I play in that? It's all of that piece, as well as the bit that we'll get to, I'm sure, on the next question, Matt, around, the actual strategies that we put in place when we're actually there at the event.
Brilliant. I appreciate that. Thanks, Tiffany. Helen?
Yeah, and exactly what Tiffany said. So it's all about your event design before you've even contacted a delegate. So how can I make this event design as inclusive for everybody? And that's looking at all areas of inclusivity. And inclusivity is at every touch point. So from your event marketing, your communications, your registration process, right through to the post-event follow-up call, and email asking people for feedback type stuff. Make sure that every touch point, every element where your delegate's going to have an experience with you as the event organizer or a member of your team. How inclusive is that? And then have a think about that delegate journey. Pre-event anxiety is real. It's very real. Attrition, normal attrition for a paid event is around about 20-25%. Can you see a link? you're likely to find that the majority of people that drop out of your event and do not attend your event, the ones that don't send you the email to let you know they're not coming, the ones that we all moan about. I've seen plenty of people on LinkedIn moaning about us neurospicy people. You can guarantee that the vast majority of those people that do not turn up to your event are neurodivergent, and that's because the pre-event anxiety is built up so much they become fearful that they're going to become overwhelmed in the event environment and they don't show up, because they're not going to let you know because they're fearful of how you might react to them, and they don't want to be judged because they're not turning up. Okay, so these are all things that we need to consider and think about. It's not just making sure that you've got quiet spaces. There are so many different elements into it, even down to food choices. Neurodivergent people are pretty particular in terms of what they eat. They like their comfort foods. So and also as well, be careful about disclosure. You cannot force neurodivergent people or people with any disability, whether that is visible or hidden, to disclose elements of their disabilities. It goes against the Equality Act. So what you're much better doing, look at your event design, designed with inclusivity in mind and accessibility in mind. There are plenty of resources out there. There's a fantastic resource as well for neurodiversity, which is called the New Project. There's a checklist. It's amazing. It's been spearheaded by Google. And I can talk about it. There's a whole other session I could do on that.
Can you just describe that again? So what was the name of it? The U Project?
It's called the New Project. New. So NEU. For neurodiversity. So the New Project. And I can share a link to it as well afterwards and get them to send that. There's a checklist and a whole host of information. It's amazing.
Maybe if you like them on the chat, that would be really helpful. Okay.
Yes, I'll pop it.
Yes, you can pop it in the chat. That'd be amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Helen, and thanks for that. And I think also there's thinking about the conversation where we're at so far and what we've covered. I think for anybody that's an organizer of a meeting, maybe there needs to be some sort of sensory filtering objective at the beginning. So before we start raising anxiety, thinking about, so sensory could be the lighting, the sounds, the smells, the things that already have been spoken about a little bit. And one thing that was starting to trigger in my head when we're talking about some of those things is about food choices. I know that Kerry had mentioned about food choices at the conference. There was bowls and people didn't have to sit to eat and so on. But also recognising that people with autism in particular, so one of the neurodiverse categories being autism, people with autism tend to have quite a limited food range. So they prefer just simple foods. They don't want it to be overly complicated. It doesn't have to be Michelin-starred catering. It could just be simple things, plain chicken, pasta and so on. But we become quite fancy-pantsy with the type of food sometimes, don't we, that we want to put on. We want to do a display for the property, that they're really good at culinary delights, but actually sometimes simplistic things can be really helpful, especially for people who are panicking a bit about, well, what am I going to eat, where am I going to get my time, and then we can overlay into that autism and eating challenges, and there are some really sort of serious considerations that we can put in there, which actually are really simple. They're not difficult to achieve.
I always say that the simple is just communicate what you're doing. So if you've planned a menu, tell people what the menu is. So you don't always need to put in that consideration, but if you let people know this is what we're going to be eating, then that neurodivergent person can go, I won't eat that. They'll probably turn around and say, do you mind if I bring my own?
Yeah, or they won't say anything.
They'll probably find that they'll bring a little.
Yeah, so give the options, definitely.
Where else I can go? Give choice. Choice is a good word.
Yeah, so we're leading into strategies now, and I really want to bring in Frame Eventwell as well, because I think what you do is fantastic. Give everybody a bit of a very quick sight of what Eventwell is all about. I hope somebody can pop the link into the chat as well. Don't worry, Helen, we've got the team in the background who will do this for us, so you don't need to worry. Tell us a bit more about Eventwell, just very brief overview.
So Eventwell we founded in 2017, and when we first started, we had very much a mental health kind of focus. But lockdown happened. We diversified as everybody else in the events industry, and obviously the travel industry had to as well. Our hands were forced, and then kind of coming out of kind of lockdown, we kind of picked up on the anxiety of people returning to event environments. We started to train up some of our team as mental health first aiders. We started having event organisers approach us to kind of say, could you provide mental health first aiders for our event? And I'd always had, obviously, we started to delve more into neurodiversity, hidden disabilities, and what that was about. And I'd kind of said, we can provide mental health first aiders, but we can't do that without a space. So when you do mental health first aid, at an event, you need a psychologically safe, Matthew touched on psychological safe, you need a safe environment to be able to give somebody mental health first aid in the event environment, and also obviously help somebody who's it's not a mental distress crisis, but somebody's gone into sensory overload, so somebody's neurodiversity overload. So that's where the quiet room came in. And then our knowledge and experience. Quiet rooms are not new. They've been around for a very, very long time. They're just very, very new in the events exhibitions industry because we've just not embraced it as part of the event design. So what we do at Eventwell, it is different to some other quiet rooms that you might come across, mainly because our quiet rooms are supervised. So our quiet rooms provide a safe space. It can't be called a safe space if it's not supervised, by the way, because your safe person is in an Eventwell quiet room, and our safe people are our Eventwell hosts, are mental health first aid trained, neurodiversity awareness trained, safeguarding trained, DBS checked. They're event welfare officers, but we don't call them event welfare officers because that can be a bit scary to some people. It can actually frighten people off from using the space because of the stigma, discrimination, or all of those elements that are still there. So we call them hosts. So our guys will offer a cup of tea, make sure people are comfortable. Is there anything I can do for you? Help yourself to books, magazines, make yourself comfortable. So our spaces really, they're for everybody. They have neurodivergence and mental health well-being at its heart and core. So we're there to provide that space for anybody that needs it. But the idea of our space is it's a space for everybody. Yeah. Accessible, inclusive. It's for the 10-minute brain break, we call it. So in between your sessions, go and rest your brain for a minute so it can absorb the content. Okay, so you can go to the next session being as productive and fruitful and engaging. You can participate, you can take part because your brain's kind of going, what's next type stuff, rather than your brain kind of going, enough already, kind of stuff, I can't take any more. Okay, when we all get like that when we attend events. So in a nutshell, that's what our spaces are about. The brain break for everybody.
A brain break. I love that. And I'm just going to step in just quickly, and then Tiffany, I'll get your feedback on that, because I just want to clarify a couple of points. When you say making a cup of tea, we are not talking about just your normal English breakfast tea here. We are talking about infused teas that bring delight and joy and rest and peace and calm and tranquility. So please, if you want this to happen, get Helen involved. That's a big pitch, by the way, Helen. So
thank you.
Don't owe me anything for that. But also the space, and I just want to clarify a point about the space. It is not for working in. It is not for having meetings in, and it is definitely not for taking your conference calls in. It is more about just having that brain break. And I really think it's brilliant. I spent a lot of time there during the ITM conference because my brain just wires itself so quickly, and I think it's just I needed that time out. So it's brilliant. So there you go. That's a big plus for what you do. Tiffany, just going to ask you around that question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you a funny story, Matt. I don't think I've shared this with you yet, but Helen and I used to work together, didn't we, Helen? Years and years and years ago. We opened a new hotel for Marriott, didn't we? The Liverpool Marriott South. And Helen was in the conference team. And it was so funny. So I'd heard about Helen's product. I'd heard about Eventwell, but I didn't ever marry up Helen with Eventwell, because Helen, you got married and changed your name. I got married, changed my name, etc. So we kind of got together. We were on the screen like going, hello. Gosh, I just think this product is absolutely fantastic. And the whole point that you've just said, Helen, this is not, the piece around, it's not going in to put you to work on your laptop to do conference calls, etc. This is switch off for everybody. And that's the point with this whole piece around our recommendations, around what we would like to see moving forward within a standard offering from a meeting and event perspective, is that it covers something for everybody. So it's not kind of saying, actually, you are neurodivergent, so you go to this route. That's not what it's about at all. It's about having a space for everybody. And I think that's what we've kind of talked about, is that, this follows, right? People start to use facilities and then other people follow, and they kind of go, this is really cool. I really like this idea. We could all benefit from switching our brain off and having that brain break for 10 minutes. So I just think the product is absolutely fantastic, Helen. So I'm so happy that you've come on and shared all of that with the team today. It's really wonderful.
I think, yeah, and I think we're all lushing and loving over this product. But I think for anybody out there that's listening that is a meeting planner or somebody that organises conference events that gets involved in those, it is a serious consideration now, isn't it? It's got to be. We've got to think beyond the simple, table planning and staging. It's got to be around the whole product and program, and in terms of strategies to drive that, so I think what we're getting to, and we've got about 10 minutes left, and I know Helen is jumping straight onto another call, and I really don't like the thought of somebody jumping off of one call onto another one, so we will try to summarize very quickly and bring this to a close before so she can at least breathe for a moment. If you have any questions, please do feel free to drop them in. We haven't got any in there at the moment, I don't think, unless Kerry's going to tell me in a moment. But just to sort of put a wrap around this a little bit, and we'll ask the sort of the final question in a moment. But thinking about that pre-planning, I think that's where this is sort of, let's be honest, let's be open, let's think about sensory challenges, the communications, the clarity to communication, because one of the big things, of course, is less ambiguity around what's expected and more information about what's expected. So be open and say, this is what we expect from you in the conference or the meeting in advance really helps people to manage anxiety. Now that links into mental health as much as it does to neurodiversity. So be very clear in the event itself, and at the event itself, consider all aspects of each part, the way it's programmed, the way that it works, but also consider how to engage in more brain breaks. I like that concept, and I think that's something we should all try to sort of establish more around. And then afterwards, of course, get feedback. And I think the feedback genuinely for me is about just saying, how did you feel during the event? In terms of course, there's the success factors of how well the event was perceived and the sessions were run and people felt they'd learned, but also the feeling piece. I think that's where I'm passionate about this piece. It's all about the feels, and it's not just about hugging, but it's more about if you acknowledge that people have real feelings, if they walk away from that feeling a bit low, maybe we should ask the question as to why, and we should try to establish better connections to some of those emotional feelings. Sorry, my dog's barking. So that's what we've got to try to do. So the future. So what does the future of a meeting and event space look like to you, Helen? Let's come to you quickly first.
Oh, the future, kind of that the events are environments for all people.
Yep.
And then we stop having these and we just do it. Kind of stuff. It's just normal. That we have a hashtag or hub at every event. So we've kind of said by 2030 it'd just be normal for you to go to an event and there'd be the space for the brain break for whoever needs to use it for whatever purpose you need to use it for. And it's people stop asking for it. They stop asking, do you have one? And it's just, where is it? Type stuff. That's where I'd like us to be. And then we design programs and content and food design and stuff where people just feel safer. And don't get me wrong, I love my industry. It's my passion. I've been in it for 26 years. So I don't do any of that. None of the stuff that Eventwell does is to call the industry out or give it a bad vibe or bad name. It's to make it better.
Yeah.
And so that as many people as possible. Me as a neurospicy person, I want to have the same experience that an event marketer, when they send me that email, they're going to say, you're going to have the best time if you attend this event. The reality of that at the moment is that's not true for an awful lot of people. It's not. They're not going to have the best the experience at all. So that for me, we'll get there. We will get there. People are listening. It's going in the right direction. Things are changing, and that's just amazing. Let's change that. I have a 7-year-old daughter. Tiffany has a daughter. Matt, you've got kids about to going to be embarking and going to the workplace. By the time our kids get into workplace and go to events, it'll be different, a completely different experience to what I've lived with. So that's the future.
And I think you're right, and it comes down. It is the future proofing, isn't it? It's the how do we future proof the industries? How do we make sure that companies get the best and maximum output from their events and stuff? And it's one of them is to connect people to feeling excited, or even as the conference from ITM was about energized. Because I think that's it, isn't it? We want to, but energized doesn't just mean keep going at high octane levels. It also means taking time to rest and recover and take breaks. Tiffany, your thoughts for the future?
Yeah, and likewise, Matt, all of the above what you've both just said, but also, I think showcasing it with the ITM spring event, you consulted with them, you had all of those pre-conversations. So, kind of that was covered. So those first couple of slides that Kerry presented to us, actually, that, we kind of talked at the beginning, didn't we? We had a couple of minutes and we were like, actually, in summary, that is what this is about. These are the kind of adjustments that we should be considering to put in place for meetings and events. You've lived it and you've had that experience at the ITM Spring Conference for anybody that attended that. And, the big thing for me is it's not massively difficult to do. So a lot of those things are having the thought process before and putting strategies in place. Bringing Eventwell in and a quiet room space is definitely a strategy. But the other things around that, like, the buddy program, having, outside space and activities, those things are built into the program content. And my wish for the future, the same as I believe all of us on this session, is that what Helen has said, this becomes the norm. As the norm is, tell me about your day delegate package, a standard meeting room, 2 lots of tea and coffee, lunch in the restaurant, and a projector, that we have that list of those things there as well, that just becomes the norm and inclusive for everybody. And that's where I would like to see it go.
Brilliant. No, I love that. And thank you, Tiffany, for sharing that. Helen, for sharing your thoughts for the future as well. For me, I just want inclusivity to be inclusive of everybody, not exclusivity. So it's not that we create this for just a small community, it's for everybody. That's what this is all about. And the reason for these sessions is really to help to stimulate conversation. One of the things I talk about within Simca, my business, is, awareness, education and support. If we don't do the awareness piece first, we're going to struggle. Because if we put all the support functions in place, if we keep putting Eventwell systems in conferences, but we don't let people know what they're there for, then how are we ever going to improve the programs? That's what we've got to do. So for everybody out there, think about how you raise awareness of these topics. This is exactly the point of this conversation today. How can you educate yourself better? Maybe you do some neurodiversity training, or you do some other things, that help you to evolve your ways of seeing and understanding mental health and wellbeing, or neurodiversity as well. And then you provide the right support to the people who need it. We are at the end of this almost. Kerry, I know you're sat there somewhere in the back. I did, hopefully you're going to pop on. I know, Helen, you literally are right on the edge right now, so I don't like this thought of leaving you. Kerry, you there?
I'm back. Thank you all so much. Helen, I know that you've got another call, so please feel free to drop off. But just before you do that, I want to say a huge thanks for sharing your experience, your passion and your knowledge in this area. We really, really appreciate it. So thank you, and please go ahead and grab a breath before your next call. But to Tiffany and Matt, thank you so much as well. It's such an important conversation. We often pride ourselves across the business travel industry in being a very warm and supportive community, and we are. But we also owe it to ourselves to really look at how we build future experiences across our events, across our meetings, so that we make everyone feel really, really safe, welcome, and supported to bring all of those different aspects and views into our working life. And that's really, really important. So thank you all for sharing some of those really valuable tips. The session has been recorded, so for anybody watching, you can review it again. We will share some of those slides and the contact details for those on the call as well, should anybody want to follow up. But thank you very, very much for everyone for listening and taking the time to listen. And it is really about being mindful as we look through how we plan events and just look at what we're doing and questioning ourselves in terms of, does that action fit for everybody and cover those needs of those attending? And it's something, as we say, those little simple changes can make a huge difference to individuals, and that's what we all want to do. So coming up next from ITM, we've got Inside the Mind of the Buyer happening on Thursday. We've got the fabulous Audrey Moore that's going to be moderating that alongside Sarah Makings, Jamie Finney, and also Kim Trenter. And then we have our forum up in Scotland on the 14th of June and our Achievement Awards at the end of June. So again, we'd love to see those that are available to come and join us at those events. And we will certainly be making sure that as we plan those, we take into consideration all of the things we've discussed today. But I can't thank all of our speakers enough. And, Matt, and Tiffany and Helen were hugely instrumental in helping us drive some of that change through the different things we included across our conference. So thank you. And thank you everybody for listening. And we hope to see you all very, very soon, and really appreciate you taking the time to join us today to listen to this conversation. It will be one that we continue. So really look forward to everybody's thoughts and feedback following today. So thank you, everyone. And we will look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.